It is time for Making Connections. And of course, this is our interview segment where we meet up with people right here in our community and sometimes elsewhere as well and get to hear their stories. Now, just last week, we heard the news that Yoon Go-eun's novel, The Disaster Tourist, or 밤의 여행자들, won a prestigious crime fiction award in the UK. And this was made possible because it was translated into English by Lizzie Buehler through the sponsorship of the Literature Translation Institute of Korea. So we're going to be connecting with Lizzie in just a bit on the line. But in the studio with me is Barry Welsh, literary critic and assistant professor at Dongguk University. Good morning and hello, Barry.
Good morning. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you in the studio. It's great to be reunited with you as well. Of course, we know each other from a different time, a different station as well.
Yes, right.
It's great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you again. Yes, fantastic.
I see that you've been very busy.
Right. I guess, just busy teaching at Dongguk. And but apart from that, really, I live quite a quiet life, just reading books most of the time. And,
very modest. I mean, you are no stranger to our listeners at TBS. You hosted the Bookend and Barry's Book Club. You are also hosting a lot of events for the Seoul Book and Culture Club as well, meeting up with many Korean authors. So you have been very busy spreading your love of books and also especially Korean literature. So since you're not really a stranger to our audiences, let me ask you, though, how you got so involved with Korean literature. Do you remember your first Korean book that you read and how you fell in love, kind of?
Right, sure, of course. So I moved to Korea in just after the financial crash in 2009. So I'd been working for an investment company, and of course it was kind of a difficult time. And so I came here around about 2010. And at the time, Seoul Global Center, they had this wonderful program for giving free Korean classes. So I was taking these classes, and I'm sure many listeners will know in that neighborhood in Gwanghwamun, there's a very famous bookstore.
A very big one, yes.
Yeah, a very big bookstore. And so if I was early for my Korean class, I would go and browse the book shelves in this wonderful bookstore. And one day I was, just browsing aimlessly, and I saw this. I was struck by this book. The title of this book and the front cover had this incredible image. And the book was called I Have the Right to Destroy Myself. And it's a book by Kim Young-ha. I think it was his first novel to be translated into English. And it was the title and the image on the cover. The image on the cover is this sort of figure falling past the silhouette of the moon over like a nighttime nightscape of Seoul. And there was something about that image that really spoke to me.
Very dark.
Yeah, right. So, when I was living in Seoul back then, I was kind of overwhelmed by the city. I grew up in the countryside in Scotland, and before I came here, I was living on an island in the Irish Sea. And I found Seoul very
different.
Yeah, very overwhelming.
Right.
And there was something about that image that spoke to that feeling of alienation or something.
It's interesting that you're this well-known literary critic and you're acknowledging that you were attracted by this book cover in a way as well.
Right, sure,
sometimes we say, don't judge a book by its cover, but sometimes it is what really draws you in.
Right, yeah, I think that can frame it because actually that's not my favorite Korean novel, not even my favorite Kim Young-ha novel.
Right, interesting.
It might be my least favorite of his books, actually. But that image, there was something about that image and the tone of his writing. Like they did a good job of choosing an image that suited the tone of that novel. And so that's what got me. That was my first Korean novel. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. But it got you hooked. I mean, obviously, something about it kept you coming back for more as well. And of course, since 2010, Korean literature has come a long way, especially when it comes to finding an audience overseas. And we've had some novels being translated and winning prestigious awards, including The Disaster Tourist. And let's get to that because we want to talk about this. 밤의 여행자들, winner of the Crime Fiction in Translation Dagger category, award by the Crime Writers Association. So this is my first time hearing about this award. Tell us about its significance.
Right, so this is an award given to celebrate sort of crime genre, right? So crime writing in general. It started in the United Kingdom. It actually goes back quite a long way. It started in 1960, but actually started 5 years before that with a different name.
Okay.
It was the Crossed Red Herring Award. So a red herring is like the misguide,
Right.
the misdirection. But I think the Golden Dagger is a
Dagger's
better
nicer,
name.
yeah. Shorter too.
And the first book that won it was actually a book that not many people seem to remember. It's called The Little Walls by Winston Graham. But there have been some very notable winners over the years. So John le Carré won in 1963 for The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, for a very famous series of novels. Ian Rankin won in 1997 for Black and Blue about Detective Rebus. And then in 2006, the organization started a separate award for translated crime novels. And some of the big nominees people might know are Stieg Larsson for the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo books. But probably the most well-known winner is the French writer Fred Vargas, who won the award 3 times.
Wow.
And then Swedish writers like Henning Mankell and Leif Persson have been some of the big names.
Okay. So this is the first time that a Korean writer has won this award, this prestigious award?
Right, yes. I think it definitely is the first time they've won. It might have been the first time a Korean crime novel has been nominated as well.
Even.
Yeah.
Wow, well done. Okay. So Yoon Go-eun, of course, is the writer of the Korean novel 밤의 여행자들. Tell us a little bit about the author. I mean, have you met her?
No, unfortunately, I haven't had the chance to meet Yoon, but I understand that she did graduate from Dongguk University.
There's a connection.
Well before I started, but she studied creative writing at Dongguk University, debuted in 2004 when she won the Daesan Collegiate Literary Prize. In 2008, she won the Hangari Literary Award for The Zero G Syndrome. And since then, she's published 3 short story collections, Table for One, Aloha, and The Old Car and the Hitchhiker, as well as this novel as well. And has lots of fans here in Korea. And The Disaster Tourist, even before it won this award, has kind of become extremely popular. It has lots of cheerleaders and supporters on sort of book social media sites and things like that.
Now, unfortunately, I have not read this book. So could you give maybe a very brief synopsis of it?
Right, sure. So it has a fantastic concept, very original idea. We have the novel's protagonist, Yona, as a young woman. She's somewhat jaded and dissatisfied with her life. She feels that she's at a crossroads in her life. She's been working for an unusual travel agency called Jungle that arranges trips to places that have been struck by natural disasters and climate change catastrophes. So a very timely book, even though it was written quite some time ago. They organize for people to go to places that have experienced hurricanes, tsunamis, earthquakes, and so on. She's been there for 10 years and she feels that she's sort of stagnated in her career. And she starts noticing ominous signs that maybe she's about to get sacked. And then her problems are made worse when a more senior member of staff starts harassing her in the workplace. So she decides to quit, but she's given the opportunity to travel on one of the company's tours instead. So she goes off to one of these disaster locations that her company's famous for. And she's sent to this impoverished desert island of Mui. And there she uncovers this sort of disturbing plan hatched by the desperate locals who live there.
Okay, so that's where the crime element, I guess, comes into play?
So there was a great interview with Yoon recently, and she says she thinks this book is genre fluid. This isn't a typical crime novel,
right? Because the way that you mentioned it, until basically all of it, until now, I don't see the crime element.
Right, I think that's why it won this award, because it's so unique and original, and it's got a great take on a crime.
Okay, and very timely, like you said as well.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely.
Well, I think this would be a great time to segue into our conversation with the translator of the novel, Lizzie Buehler. Lizzie studied comparative literature and creative writing at Princeton University and also holds an MFA in literature translation from the University of Iowa. Her translations from Korean have appeared in the Massachusetts Review, Korean Literature Now, Litro, as well as many others as well. So we have Lizzie on the line right now. Hello, Lizzie.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear. And you can hear us fine too?
I can.
Great. Glad to have you on the show, and congratulations as well. So let's talk about translating The Disaster Tourist. Was this your first sort of major translation work as well?
Well, interestingly, this wasn't actually the first book that I translated. This was actually the second book that I translated. The first book that I translated was also by Yoon.
Oh.
And it's a short story collection called Table for One.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually going to come out next year with Columbia University Press. But because of the different timelines of publication between university presses and trade presses, The Disaster Tourist ended up coming out first, although it is my second translation.
Very good. Well, how did the opportunity to work with Yoon come about then?
So I began translating Yoon's work when I was an undergrad, actually. I took a literary translation course. I was lucky enough that Princeton's creative writing department had regular translation courses. So I took a translation course, and at the time I had mostly thought of this as an opportunity to continue using my Korean, and I didn't really know much about what literary translation entailed, but I really enjoyed the class. And for our final project, we had to translate a short story, and at the time, I had really only read maybe 10 Korean short stories for one of my Korean classes, and I went through the stories that I had read, and it turned out that one of the stories in Table for One ended up being, it hadn't been translated into English. Actually, none of them had, because I ended up translating the whole book later, but I decided to translate that story for the class, and then it sort of turned into my senior thesis, and then I kept working on it and finished the whole collection, and then I pitched it to publishers, and that's why it's coming out now.
Wow, that's a long series of kind of events. And it almost seems like it was by chance that you came upon this collection of stories that hadn't been translated. Did you have a chance to meet Yoon as well? I mean, what's the relationship between the translator and the writer? Is it mostly just through the publisher, or does she also have to kind of give the go-ahead for you to translate her works?
It really depends. The type of relationship that exists between a translator and a writer is very dependent. I know there are some translators who really are not in super close contact with their writers and mostly communicate through the publisher, and others who have become very close friends. And I'm fortunate that Yoon has been super supportive throughout this entire process. And so from really the beginning of my work translating Table for One, she made herself available through email, and when I'm in the midst of translating one of her books, we send pretty regular emails about the specifics of, what certain sentences mean or how to translate certain things pretty regularly, sometimes for months at a time. And I was lucky enough to meet Yoon in person 2 summers ago when I was in Seoul doing research for my MFA thesis.
What was that like? Meeting her?
It was great. It was really fun. I think because we had been in touch by email for almost 4 years at that point. Not 4 years, 3 years at that point.
And that was the first time that you actually met. Okay.
It was the first time we'd met in person, but we'd been sending emails for so long. And because I had spent so much time working very closely with her writing, I felt like I already knew her to some degree.
Right.
And I think we have a lot of similarities in terms of what interests us. I think we're both sort of interested in kind of strange little facts about the world. So I think, it was really wonderful to meet her, even though we're at sort of different stages in life, because she's, an established writer, teaches at a university, and I'm, still in school and just sort of beginning my writerly career. But I really look up to her, and
right. There must be a connection, right? Because I almost think that translators, especially when you're translating the works of one author, it seems like they're almost like an alter ego. You both become sort of alter egos of each other. And you also said in an interview that translation is not about just changing one word to another word. It's like solving a puzzle. So do you think you have to be a good writer to be a good translator, or does it come kind of the opposite way? Is it the original work that has to be very good for the translated work to be very good as well?
I think both of those are sort of true. I think that if you're not good at writing in, the language that you're translating into, the translation's not going to be particularly interesting or compelling to readers. And I can certainly see situations where something that is amazing in the original language can be flattened when translated into English.
Right.
For example, if the person translating took a extremely literal approach. But also, there are some texts that no matter how amazing the translator is, I think might not be particularly interesting if they don't have anything particularly special about them in the original language. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a combination, I think, of the skill of both the writer and the translator, and you need both of them for a successful translation.
Okay. I'm in the studio with Barry Welsh, who's a literary critic. Barry, did you have any questions maybe for Lizzie as well?
Oh, so I just wonder, hello Lizzie, it's lovely to speak to you. I was lucky enough to read the Table for One story because it was published in a magazine a year or two ago. I just wondered, could you tell us what is the rest of the collection like? Are there any similarities or parallels with The Disaster Tourist, or is it completely different?
I think you can definitely see some similarities in the sort of pervading theme of loneliness and disconnection from other individuals. So I think that's something that Yoon really likes to implement in all of what she's written so far. I would say that Table for One is perhaps even wackier in a lot of the stories than The Disaster Tourist. So I'm really excited for people who've read The Disaster Tourist and want more to read Table for One, because I think it's super fun. The stories are all incredibly creative and really weird, and I think that people will like it.
I like fun and weird stories too. You said this is going to be coming out soon as well in English, Table for One?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so the collection should be coming out at the beginning of 2022.
Very good. And Lizzie, what about you? Do you think there's a book in you that's waiting to come out as well? A story that you would like to tell in your own words?
So for a long time, I didn't think that I had any interest in doing my own writing, and I thought that I would strictly stick to translating because that was what really called to me. But recently I actually have begun working on my own novel, and I think maybe just being surrounded by writers and spending enough time in the world of literary translation made me want to give it a try myself. So I've started working on a novel. It's very different from Yoon's, much more based in realism and sort of my own life experiences. But I'd like to think that I've learned about writing from translating Yoon's work as well.
Does that mean that you'll also continue to translate? Maybe not just Yoon's works, but will you continue to translate as well? Korean books?
I'm actually working on another book right now by a writer named Seo Soo-jin, and the novel is called Korean Teachers, and that's going to come out with a Singaporean publisher called Harriet Press at the end of this year.
Wow, so you're very busy. Well, we wish you the best.
I've been very busy translating.
It looks like you're going to be very busy.
I might take a little break after this.
Well, Lizzie, I want to thank you very much for joining us on the line today, and also congratulations on this prize as well. Thank you for your great work and for introducing Yoon Go-eun's great work for our international readers as well. Thank you very much. Wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
All right. Barry, what do you think? I mean, do you think this is like, we've been talking about K-literature and how it seems to be getting a lot more attention overseas in addition to the prizes as well. Do you think that this is kind of just the beginning of another K-wave in literature? What do you think?
Oh, right. So, so in the last few years, certainly, it really does seem like there's this been sort of groundswell of expectation and people excited about Korean novels. And there's been so many fantastic books translated by translators like Lizzie and several other kind of high-profile translators as well. So it's a great time to be a fan of Korean literature. There's been so many great books this year. It seems like every month there's, at least one or two sort of big, high-profile new releases. I think it probably will continue. Like Lizzie said there, she has the Korean teacher's book coming this year, and then there's another Yoon Koon book next year. And it seems like for the next 2 or 3 years, there are lots of books that I know are coming. And
Right.
so I think it'll continue, definitely.
Let me ask you a question that can be kind of difficult maybe for listeners who may not have had the chance to read a work by a Korean author. What would your advice be? I mean, there are so many great authors, like you say, so many works out there. I don't know, your own experience, like go to a bookstore, just, browse, pick up a book, maybe the cover that kind of appeals to you.
Oh, right. So these days it seems like that social media seems to be where most people are a growing number
Very
of
true.
people are getting their recommendations. I hear that book TikTok is apparently very influential these days. And, Bookstagram, TikTok is
Wow,
huge
okay.
among young readers. And, there's some Korean books that seem ripe for that type of marketing or embrace by fans. But yeah, just read some reviews or join like an online group. There's so many groups these days where people share recommendations and talk about what books they're reading.
You have some too, right? You're still running a book club, aren't you?
Well, no,
Not
not
yet?
really.
Oh, okay.
Since they were sort of big in-person
see.
events, so not at the moment. Yeah.
Okay. Well, hopefully you can restart that. And thank you for the recommendations. And thank you for joining us, Barry.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.